Danny from projectmanaverse.com, and in this video I'm going to explain how to write your project test plan. So let's get started. First of all, let's talk about testing. This is all about IT projects. So when you're building something in your project, some kind of software or application, whatever you're doing, you need to build it. But once you've done that, before you can release it to the customer to use it, you need to test it thoroughly. So you need to make sure that you're flushing out all the defects, you're fixing the defects, you need to make sure you've met all your requirements. You need to make sure the application is working alongside the business processes that it was intended to be used for. All that stuff needs to come out during the testing phase. And you could have several phases of testing on your project, not just one. So you could have system testing, system integration testing, user acceptance testing, lots of different phases. And then what you want to do is ideally tie everything together as well in one master test plan. So the principles that I'm going to talk about in this video and the steps that I'm going to go through can be applied to individual test plans for each individual testing phase. And they can also be applied to the master test plan as well. So you can use this for all of them. So let's jump into the actual test plan and how you write it and what goes into it. So step one is you want to confirm at the start who the audience is of this test plan, who is it meant for, and you want to make it clear who needs to be reviewing it, who needs to be approving it, and who is responsible for contributing to it, and who needs to be informed of it, and not necessarily even review it or approve it, just to be informed that it's happening. So make sure that's captured in the start of the document so you know who the audience of this document is intended for. The next thing is to make sure you've got a little change control box at the start. So once you've done your first version, you want to track any changes that have been made to that document, and you want to summarize them at the beginning on this kind of summary change control box at the start. So if you make a change, you know who's done it, you know what the change was, and it's all captured at the start. Then ideally you want to change the version of the document if it was a significant change. So make sure that's in there at the start as well. Right, the first big chunk of it is the project background section. So anyone picking it up can understand what the project is doing. You should have something in existence already. You can just copy and paste from other project documentation, your scope document or your key deliverables document, whatever you want to use. You'll have something available already, business case maybe. You can just cut and paste that. What's the project doing? What are the key deliverables? What is it all about? What's the scope? Next section is what is the scope of your testing? You want the summarized version of the scope. This is quite important, this bit. So you don't want it to be too detailed, too low level, but you want it to be a fairly summarized version or a fairly decent version that people understand. So things like, what business processes are you going to be testing as part of this test phase? What technical processes are you going to be testing as part of this test phase? What functionalities or key functionalities are you going to be testing as part of this test phase? Get that captured in the scope section, because that's really the key section of the document. What is the scope of the testing? What are you actually doing? That's what people want to know. Later on, we'll have a detailed schedule of testing with all the test scripts, but for now, just get the high level scope. So any testing that you're doing in this test phase should be able to be traced back to the scope section. So you shouldn't be testing anything that can't be traced to the section. So make sure it covers everything you're going to be doing. Okay, the next section is environment. So what test environments or environments are you going to be using for this testing? So make sure that's very clear. Make sure you've got that environment booked. And if so, make sure that's all documented. So there's no confusion about what test environment or environments are going to be used for this testing. Next is who is doing it. So who's actually going to be doing the testing. Make sure you list all the teams, if there's different teams, and then actually list the people as well. So who's going to be involved and contributing to this testing, who's going to be there to help fix the defects if there are defects. So who is going to be involved in this testing from head to toe. Make sure it's all in there. Next is a time frame. So what time frames are you working towards? Again, you don't have to worry about the detailed schedule at this point, but make sure you know when is it going to start and when is it going to finish. What's the time frame? What's the time window for it? Is it 6 weeks? Is it 8 weeks? Is it 3 months? Get that in there and get the dates in there as well. Okay, next is you need to document the processes that people need to follow. So things like the test scripts, so writing test scripts. What's the process for that? Where are the test scripts going to be held? How are they updated? How are they governed? And defects as well is another one. How do people raise defects? What software needs to be used? What's the process for raising those defects and closing them down? Is there a triage call, a daily call? So you need to make sure that all those processes are very clear and people have a reference guide as to what to do and how to follow what instructions, what steps they need to follow to be able to get this done. Okay, the next one is the defect severity guidance. So when you have defects with your product, you need to categorize them. And what we usually do is give them a severity and a criticality as well. So, sorry, a severity and a priority, beg your pardon. So the severity is how critical it is. And usually we go 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5. That's your scale. Severity 1 is it's very impactful. And that's usually reserved for it's a complete outage. No one can even sign into the application. You can't bring it up and it just knocks out all testing. That's your worst one. Sev 2 is it's pretty major. There's no workaround available. You can't work around the defect. You have to, there's just no way to do the process unless this defect has been fixed and it's got quite an impact. So if you can't get this fixed, it's got something quite significant behind it and it's going to cause a lot of problems. And then Sev 3s are a bit lower down, and then Sev 4s are more like cosmetic things that just look, so it doesn't quite look right, or it doesn't kind of drop down the right way, but you can still work around it fairly easily. But it's up to you, it's up to what your company said, but you just need to make sure you are very clear in terms of the definition of the defects, because that can be tricky in projects. Sometimes a bit of politics goes on. If you have a business area that wants to get some defects fixed, even if they're not very critical, they might sneak up the severity and classify them as Sev 2 when they're really Sev 3 just to get them fixed quicker. So just make sure you're very clear in terms of what the criteria is for each of those defect classifications, and just to make sure people are following it as well. Okay, next in your test plan, you need to make sure you've got roles and responsibilities in there as well. So I touched on this earlier, but things like who's responsible for raising a defect if it's found, because that can be a bit of faff if you have to, document the defect and attach screenshots, and not many people want to raise defects. So make sure it's clear who that sits with at the start. Make sure it's clear whose job it is to, run the daily calls. Make sure it's clear whose job it is to keep the tickets updated if you've got a defect ticket or a process ticket. Just make sure all the roles and responsibilities are clearly defined and signed up at the start, so there's no confusion over that when you're testing. Okay, next is entry and exit criteria of your testing phase. So what has to happen before you can officially start this testing? Make sure that's clear in the document. And what has to happen in order for you to finish the testing and exit the testing? What's the exit criteria? Is it that all the Sev 1 and Sev 2 defects have been closed, and there's workarounds for any leftover Sev 3 and Sev 4s with a plan to get them fix later on as fast followers? Whatever it is, make sure you've got some exit criteria defined in there, as well as the entry criteria as well. And then the final thing is that something you don't always have to have in there at the start. If you want to get all that done in a document and get that signed off, that's a great start. But at some point you're going to need a test schedule. So what you want to do is look at your test scope first of all those categories and all those business processes and functionalities that you want to test. Then you want to break those down into test scripts. So what are the individual tests that will sit behind those processes? Get that all documented into an Excel. And then you want to get a schedule for that. So day 1, what tests are you doing? Day 2, what tests are you doing? So if you've got 1,000 tests to do over your testing period, how are they going to be spread out over your 6 weeks of testing? What day are they going to be happening on? Because once you've got that, then you can track progress. If you're ahead of schedule, if you're behind schedule. If you're behind schedule, how are you going to get that time back? What are you going to do? Are you going to extend your testing time? Are you going to de-scope some tests? Are you going to bring in more resource? So so you understand where you are, and you can think about what you need to do to put things right. Okay, that is the video. I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully that was useful for you, and that gives you some idea of how to write your test plan. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos like this one, hit the subscribe button. And until tomorrow, please take care.